Legacy: the shocking story of Robert Mugabe. How does a boy born into abject poverty become the most educated president in the world, the most controversial figure in history?
We are not gays.
So, Blair, keep your England and let me keep my Zimbabwe.
Hounded off their land.
Not of their land.
It's not theirs.
Our land.
Rule over a country for 37 years, become a multi-billionaire and a national hero.
With Mugabe and his party ZANU-PF as heroes, winning the war against white rule in 1980.
I must warn you, there are different sides to the story of Uncle Bob, Robert Mugabe. From fighting British colonization jab by jab to meticulously planning massacres, from being hailed as a hero to being shamed as a villain. So let's answer the million-dollar question. Was he a hero or a villain? Is he the tyrant who ruled with an iron fist and abused his power for decades continuously, driving the whole country to the brink of collapse? Or the revolutionary leader who triumphed over colonization, not only won the war but also won the hearts of the people until the day that he died? Was he the best or the worst thing to ever happen to Zimbabwe and Africa at large?
We are not a British colony. You must know that.
Tell him again.
We are not a British colony.
At that point, I was wrestled away.
Was he an angel or a demon? Should he be mentioned when we speak about Nelson Mandela, Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, or Kenneth Kaunda, the other greatest African leaders? This question is multifaceted, so to help gain clarity, I had to break down his impact to these key sectors. 1. Pan-Africanism, where we will cover colonization, his political stance, and impact on Africa. 2. Human rights, where we will cover his take on homosexuality, racism, education, and health. 3. Economic, where we will cover the land issue, sanctions, and inflation. 4. Death, where we will go through both his physical death and the death of his career, the coup, and how necessary it was for him to stay in power for that long. Before we jump into all this tremendous drama, we need to take a step back, way back. It's February 21, 1924, and a poor lady in Kutama, Zimbabwe, by the name of Bona, experiences labor pains. She is due, and the bundle of joy in her womb can't wait to finally see the world. She is blessed with a bouncing baby boy whom they choose to name Gabriel, like the angel. She never knew how demonized he would be. Robert Gabriel Mugabe would go on to become the most hated person in the world.
Of the time. I'm still getting glad of the time.
A man once praised and hailed for his intellectual prowess, flawless articulation, fearless revolutionary leadership, trusted with the breadbasket of Africa, turned it into a basket case.
He's destroyed a wonderful country. A country that used to be a bread basket, it has now become a basket case itself.
He was initially demonized by the worst.
Well, Mugabe isn't a good guy, but it's no guarantee what comes next will be any better.
That's nonsense. It's just devilish talk.
In the words of Samora Machel, the former Mozambican president, if one day you hear the white man praise me, know that I have betrayed you. So, was this the case? Because truly, his Pan-Africanist view didn't fit anywhere in the European agenda.
Regime change, Mr. Blair. Who are you? Who are you to talk of regime change in Zimbabwe? One of us? By what connection, sir? Do you hear me?
But what could he do if the ones who hated him controlled the media and hence the narrative about him?
fighter went on to become a tyrant who ruled with an iron fist for over 3 decades, crushing any opposition.
Well, until the lion learns how to write, every story will glorify the hunter. Spoiler alert, lion never learned how to write.
The conqueror writes history. They came, they conquered, and they wrote. Now you don't expect people who came to invade us to write the truth about us. They will always write negative things about us. And they have to do that because they have to justify their invasion in all the countries.
Finally, this is the voice of an unbiased Zimbabwean speaking about his legacy. He grew up an ordinary young man, got educated, then started working as just another school teacher in Southern Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia, and Ghana. Day by day, he was infuriated by the white minority rule and decided to do something about it. This can't go on any longer, he said, not under his watch. There was need for change, and he was the change. Unfortunately, after making some anti-government comments, he was imprisoned between 1964 and 1974. They stopped him dead in his tracks. A decade went by behind bars, and when he got out, he had lost all hope. I'm joking. If they really wanted to stop him, they should have killed him instead, because upon release he went straight to establish his leadership in ZANU PF, the ruling party in Zimbabwe until today. Yeah, ne? Fast forward to 1979, he participated in the Lancaster House Agreement, putting an end to the war. Less than a decade later, the poor lady's son became the president of Zimbabwe. Not just another president, he was the most educated president in the world with 18 degrees. This just couldn't go wrong, right? That's arguable. 1. What was his take on Pan-Africanism? He immediately entered into Pan-Africanist mode. He deployed at least 12,000 troops to Congo, losing around 1.7 billion rand worth of military equipment, excluding the monthly expenditure. The ultimate goal was to unite Africa. He supported groups of the ANC guerrillas to infiltrate South Africa via Rhodesia and the guerrilla struggle of Frelimo in Mozambique.
These men are waiting for an expected attack from Frelimo, a routine reaction whenever Rhodesian forces cross into Mozambique in hot pursuit.
We've got all the capacity in the world to resist. The bigger they come, the harder they fall.
He delayed the land reform so that South Africa could attain its freedom in 1994 and believed that Africa was for Africans. Zimbabwe was for Zimbabweans.
April 27, 1994, the first democratic election was held in South Africa. It marked the end of more than 300 years of colonialism. 2. Human rights.
Growing up in Zimbabwe, we used to be told that there was no freedom of speech. Truth be told, you were guaranteed freedom of speech, but you were not guaranteed freedom after speech.
We are rebooting, hold on.
Ill mention of the president meant that it was your last day. At least, that was the narrative.
On average, during the Mugabe era, we had one abduction every day.
He ordered the 5th Brigade massacre, also known as the Gugurahunde, where more than 20,000 people, predominantly Ndebele, were killed.
Mr. Mugabe's notorious 5th Brigade has only been filmed once at this passing out parade in 1983.
Some scholars and activists actually believe that the figure could be 80,000 people. Opposition members and peaceful protesters were detained and prosecuted, beaten up by the army. It wasn't good luck.
People are being beaten by the soldiers. Some of our guys have been killed.
Under Mugabe's leadership, there was a massive expansion in education and health spending. In 1980, Zimbabwe had just 177 secondary schools, but by the year 2000, this number had risen to a whopping 1,548 schools. Geez. The literacy rate rose to a whopping 82%, one of the highest in Africa. Black people had the right to vote, but did it really matter when the votes were always allegedly rigged?
They say Zimbabwe's Electoral Commission isn't independent and the ruling ZANU-PF party will manipulate the new voters' roll to rig elections.
It's not who votes that counts. It's who counts the votes. His stance on homosexuality was clear, not under his watch.
We equally reject attempts to prescribe new rights that are contrary to our values, norms, traditions, and beliefs. We are not gays.
I believe he also never truly healed from the effects of colonization, but hey, who has? Colonization was never about the land, rather about the mind. A lot of black people are still mentally colonized today. When a fellow black is packed with money, we praise him and hail them by calling them Murungu, which means white men. I know, right? One day, Nelson Mandela was boarding a plane and noticed the pilot was black. This made him panic. How could a black man fly a plane? Open quote, I had fallen into the apartheid mindset, thinking Africans were inferior and that flying was a white man's job, he said. So, can you blame Mugabe for his stance? He believed that the white man was the enemy.
Mr. President, revoke any memory.
But then he spotted a white journalist in the throngs of those wanting the perfect soundbite.
I don't want to say white.
But the man who still calls himself President of Zimbabwe had plenty more that he wanted to say.
What have the British to do with Zimbabwe? Who are you? You bloody idiots.
Chapter 3. The economy. Over 3.1 million Zimbabweans fled overseas. But why?
Some 4 million people have left in the last 3 to 5 years.
I don't know about those numbers.
Of all records that Mugabe broke, the hyperinflation rate was the most jaw-dropping. Believe it or not, at one time, all Zimbabweans were trillionaires. I mean, the country had a $100 trillion banknote. Before you get excited, it wasn't much. I mean, a loaf of bread was costing more than 500 million Zim dollars. Yep, $1 million bread.
Prices were increasing at an astronomical rate of 7.6 billion% a month. And $1 would get you, well, we're not sure how to say it, but this many Zimbabwean dollars. By the end of 2008, the Zimbabwean dollar had effectively ceased to exist.
The argument is that this all was caused by sanctions, as Zimbabwe allegedly lost an excess of $150 billion to sanctions. Sanctions partially imposed because of the land issue. In the year 2000, land was brutally seized from the white farmers in an attempt to return the land to the black owners who had been displaced by colonization to empower them.
Farmers I'm talking about. Why is that wonderful farmland and why are they being...
What are you talking about? We are getting land from them and that's all. They are not being hounded out of the country. Not at all.
They're being hounded off their land?
Not off their land.
It's not theirs.
Our land.
Even though they bought it?
We agreed at Lancaster House that there would be land reform. Citizens by colonization, seizing land from the original people, indigenous people of the country.
But there are arguments where critics actually say that the land was unfairly distributed to his political allies and supporters who had little to no farming experience, dropping the 2001 to 2002 Zimbabwe agricultural fiscal year output by 60%. Mugabe said the British agreed to the program of land resettlement. If you read the constitution, you will find that the responsibility to pay compensation to the farmers is that of the British government. Unfortunately, the British didn't hold up to their end of the deal or the bargain.
Because Reagan reneged on that and Margaret Thatcher backed down on the British commitment. And so there was no money for land reform. And so the soldiers came back to Mugabe again. What about our land? And he said, well, they took it from you, take it back. During that period, the year or so of transition, the actual numbers of people killed were around 200 people in 2 years. Only 12 of them white farmers. And most of the killing had been done in places, whites and blacks were killed not as a political threat, but they were killed as a result of quarrels and fights that spun off where everybody was drinking too much.
And the icing on the cake is that Mugabe just didn't care about the sanctions.
We don't mind having and bearing sanctions banning us from Europe. We are not Europeans. We have not asked for any inch of Europe or any square inch of that territory. So, Blair, keep your England and let me keep my Zimbabwe.
All this now brings us to the final chapter, death. His career took an ugly turn from the year 2000 onwards, with the 2007 coup laying the final tombstone.
But this is not a military takeover of government.
But it clearly was. Troops invaded the presidential palace and put the president, Robert Mugabe, in custody.
Comrade Arajim and his family are safe and sound, and their security is guaranteed.
The famous saying goes, a good dancer knows when to leave the stage. Arguably, he was the best dancer, but 37 years, Yerena. Even in old age, he showed no signs of slowing down.
The rules were saying,
yes.
Ndiri kunzwa masimba ekuti ndakusvika semunhu ari kumhanya muresi akuda kusvika pandakuda kusvika unoziva kuti ndepapi pazana.
And people grew to resent him. They wanted a different face, at least.
We are saying he should stop. They should not run this country like a tuck shop. We have been oppressed for a very long time, so we are saying Robert Gabriel Mugabe is supposed to peacefully leave Zimbabwe.
It was a united front. Opposition supporters, people loyal to Mugabe's ZANU-PF party, and veterans of the liberation war against white rule marched together.
Can you blame them? A military coup in November 2017 was staged against him, bringing the end of Mugabeism. The words to explain how overjoyed Zimbabweans were by his resignation have not been invented. It was ecstatic. He passed on later on September 6, 2019, due to advanced cancer, reports say. This is probably the most fascinating story of rags to riches and of going from glory to misery, also from zero to hero. Regardless of one's sentiments towards him, he was a charismatic, daring leader who made a significant imprint in his country's history. I tried to give my view as unbiased as possible, guys. Mugabe definitely was not a hero. He left the country in too much shambles for that. Mugabe definitely was not a villain. He saved too many lives for that. His legacy is too complicated for both of these terms, and the best way to describe him now is that he was a villainized hero.
Let no one who is negative want to spoil what we are doing for ourselves in order to unite Africa. People must always come first in any process of sustainable development. And let our Africans come first in the development of Africa, not as puppets, not as beggars, but as a sovereign people. I thank you.